Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
The first time it happened, I brushed it off as a mistake. Maybe I had forgotten my lunch at home. The second time, I convinced myself I had misplaced it in the wrong section of the office fridge. But by the third, fourth, and fifth disappearance, denial was no longer an option. Someone was stealing my lunches. I stood in front of the break room refrigerator, my stomach growling, scanning the shelves as if my neatly packed container might suddenly reappear. But no, once again, my meal had vanished. My fingers curled into fists at my sides. Who would do something like this? And more importantly, why? Looking for something, Verity? Asked Lillian, one of my few tolerable colleagues. She leaned against the counter, sipping her tea. My lunch, I muttered. Again, someone's been taking it. Lillian's eyebrows shot up. Seriously, that's awful. You should label it. I do, I said, exasperated. Bright red marker. My name's right there on the lid. Doesn't stop them. Lillian frowned. You know, Francis has been hanging around the fridge a lot lately. I caught him yesterday stuffing a sandwich in his mouth like he was trying to hide something. Francis. The name sent a shiver of irritation down my spine. The man had a reputation, rude, dismissive, and wielding his managerial power like a club. He was the kind of person who took credit for other people's ideas and never owned up to his mistakes. A lunch thief, it fit. That evening, I hatched a plan. The next day, I arrived early and prepared my lunchbox with an unmistakable marker. Do not touch, a warning. A challenge. Then I waited. By noon, I lingered near the break room, pretending to scroll through my phone while keeping one eye on the fridge. Then, like clockwork, Francis strolled in, glancing around before yanking open the door. His gaze flickered to my lunch. I held my breath. His hand shot out. He grabbed my container and without even checking, popped it open, scooping out a forkful of pasta. I stepped forward, my pulse pounding. Enjoying my lunch, Francis? My voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of the break room fridge. He startled but covered it with an infuriating smirk. Oh, this? Thought it was mine. Same container. Easy mistake. Right, I said coolly. So you're saying you've been accidentally stealing my food for the past 2 weeks? Francis shrugged, chewing with zero remorse. Maybe you should pick a different lunchbox. My nails dug into my palm. This wasn't just theft, it was entitlement. I had caught him red-handed and he didn't care. Worse, he acted as if I were the problem. Unbelievable. I muttered, turning on my heel and marching out. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I spent the entire night tossing and turning, seething with frustration. Francis had not only stolen my lunch again, but he had the audacity to brush me off as if I were some nuisance. My stomach twisted, not just from hunger, but from sheer indignation. It was time to teach him a lesson he wouldn't forget. The plan needed to be flawless. At lunch break, I walked into the office kitchen, carrying my neatly packed lunchbox. Inside, a generous serving of homemade mashed potatoes, tender slices of roasted chicken, and the piece de resistance, rich, thick gravy laced with a heavy dose of laxative powder, just enough to make him suffer, but not enough to get me into legal trouble. I set the container inside the fridge, making sure it was placed exactly where my lunches always disappeared from. Then I left, acting as if nothing was amiss. The anticipation gnawed at me like a persistent itch. I glanced at the clock, waiting for Francis to make his move, and then it happened. From my desk, I saw him swagger into the kitchen, his usual smugness on full display. He barely even checked his surroundings before yanking my container from the fridge. My pulse quickened. I held my breath as he opened it, inhaled deeply, and muttered to himself, finally, something decent around here. My fingers tightened around my pen. Minutes later, I watched him devour the meal at his desk, completely oblivious to the trap he had walked into. I fought the urge to smirk. Now it was only a matter of time. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I noticed a shift in Francis' expression. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his face twitching ever so slightly. He gulped down his water, sweat beading on his forehead. The first signs of distress. A low groan escaped his lips. He pressed a hand to his stomach. Then, without warning, he shot up from his chair, nearly knocking his keyboard to the floor. The color drained from his face. "Oh God," he muttered. "Oh no." And just like that, he bolted. The entire office turned to watch as Francis all but sprinted toward the restroom, one hand clutching his stomach, the other flailing for balance. The door slammed shut behind him. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. Sweet, sweet justice. For the next hour, the only thing emerging from the restroom was a series of agonized groans. Colleagues exchanged amused glances. I pretended to be engrossed in my work, but inside, I was basking in victory. Francis had stolen from me one too many times, and today he had finally paid the price. The summons came at precisely 9:30 a.m. An email, cold and personal. Subject: meeting with HR. Immediate attendance required. A sharp pulse of anxiety shot through me. My plan had worked too well. Francis must have suffered enough to drag me into this mess. I grabbed my notepad, squared my shoulders, and strode into the HR office. Ms. Ellsworth, the head of HR, sat behind her desk, her expression unreadable. Francis was already there, slumped in a chair, his face pale, his eyes bloodshot. He looked wrecked. Verity. Ms. Ellsworth began, folding her hands. Francis has raised a concern about food tampering. He believes you deliberately spiked a lunch that he mistakenly ate. I nearly laughed. Mistakenly? That's interesting, I said smoothly. I wasn't aware my own lunch belonged to Francis. His jaw tightened. You knew I'd take it, he snapped. You did it on purpose. Poisoning a colleague is a serious offense. I leaned forward. So you're admitting you stole my lunch? Ms. Ellsworth sighed. The issue isn't about past incidents. It's about your response. This is a workplace, not a battlefield. I clenched my fists under the table. So you're saying I should just let him steal from me? I'm saying retaliation wasn't the right approach, she replied. Moving forward, I suggest you lock your lunches away. Francis, you. Francis waved a dismissive hand. Yeah, I'll bring my own food. That was it? A wrist slap? I exhaled sharply. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Francis thought he had won, but I wasn't done. The moment HR dismissed me with their pathetic lock your lunch solution, a new idea sparked. This time, I wouldn't just humiliate him. I'd make sure he'd never dare touch my food again. That night, I carefully prepared my masterpiece. Mashed potatoes, soft, buttery, and inviting, but hidden within, a delightful mix of earthworms and a couple of roaches, their dark shells blending seamlessly into the creamy texture. The mere thought made my stomach turn, but for Francis, it would be the perfect punishment. Morning arrived, and I placed the bait in the fridge, but I needed proof. So before stepping away, I carefully adjusted a small hidden camera in front of the fridge, its lens capturing everything. An hour passed, then two. Finally, Francis strolled into the break room, glancing around before opening the fridge. I watched from my desk, my heart pounding. The live feed on my phone showed him grabbing my container, peeling the lid back. He smirked, probably thinking he had won again. He dug in. A pause, a slow chew. Then, his face twisted. Oh God. Francis shot up, gagging violently. The chair crashed behind him as he sprinted toward the restroom, retching and cursing. The office fell into stunned silence, then erupted into whispers. I smiled, satisfaction curling inside me. But the real victory? The footage. Francis's theft, his humiliation, it was all there. By lunchtime, I'd have the evidence HR couldn't ignore. This time, he wouldn't get away with it. This time, he was done. I watched the footage over and over, each replay filling me with deep satisfaction. There it was, Francis, red-handed, stealing my lunch, taking a massive bite, then his face twisting in horror as he realized the sickening truth. His gagging, his panic, his wild sprint to the restroom. It was perfect. Undeniable. By noon, the office was buzzing. Someone claimed Francis was still in the restroom, moaning in agony. Others whispered about how he had turned an unnatural shade of green, but I had bigger plans. Clutching my USB drive, I strode into HR's office. Hannah, the same rep from before, looked up, her expression flat. You again? She sighed. I slid the drive across the desk. Play it. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard, but she complied. As the footage unfolded, I saw her face shift, shock, discomfort, and finally, realization. This is bad, she murmured. For him, yeah, I said. I expect consequences. She swallowed. We'll review. No, I interrupted. You told me to lock up my food instead of holding him accountable. I did one better. I caught him in the act. This isn't just lunch theft. It's workplace misconduct. Letting him get away with it will make you look complicit. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I knew she was backed into a corner. By the afternoon, an email was sent to the entire office. Effective immediately, Francis is placed on suspension pending investigation. I expected some quiet satisfaction, maybe even relief. But instead, the office erupted. Whispers turned into outright conversations. People began sharing their own stories. How Francis had bullied interns, how he had taken credit for others' work. HR was suddenly flooded with complaints. 2 days later, another email arrived. Francis's employment has been terminated, effective immediately. It turned out my revenge had only been the tipping point. HR couldn't ignore the storm of reports that followed. As I packed up my things to head home that evening, I caught sight of the break room fridge. The door stood ajar, its shelves filled with neatly labeled lunches. No missing meals. No theft. Justice was served.
Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Would you like more stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss any videos. See you tomorrow.